Morning, Mr. May. How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm good.
I want you to pray for somebody.
Okay.
Jody Young goes over a generation, his aunt passed away.
Remember this for sure. Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
It's great to be here this morning. Great to be with y'all, and we've got a really neat lesson this morning. I think there's a lot in it, and hopefully we can bring it all out. But I'm just excited about sharing it. I really appreciate Lonnie filling in for me last week, and sorry we wasn't able to be here, but just excited to be here this morning. So in our Sunday school material, we've been talking about Elisha, and we're following up with another account in 2 Kings of the story of Elisha and what he was doing and what was going on. But if we look at the title of our lesson this morning, it's that God's hand in restoring lives. And the point of our lesson is that God restores us as we are obedient to Him. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on this morning. We're looking at 2 Kings chapter 5. The first 19, 20 verses is where our lesson comes from. So 2 Kings chapter 5, essentially 1 through 20 is what we're going to be focusing on. But, as we get into this story, as we get into this idea of God's hand in restoring lives, and then especially our point being that God restores us as we are obedient to Him. We had a question in our material, and the first question that we have this morning is, when have you misjudged a book by its cover?
Misjudged a book.
Anybody got any ideas? How many of us have ever heard the saying that you can't judge a book by its cover? Has anybody ever heard that? We've all heard that, right? And so what this question is, the question is actually asking, when is there a time that you have misjudged a book by its cover?
Well, you can also consider that book a person also.
Oh no, absolutely. I think that's
I've done that many times.
Absolutely, Carla. I think we all have. Anybody else have any examples?
People's where my mind immediately went to.
Oh, most.
Not only that they're better than what you think they might be, but also the other way around too.
Absolutely. It can go both ways, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. What April's saying, and Carlotta as well, that I think a lot of us, when we ask that question or we hear that statement, it's referring to folks. It's referring to people, and that when we say don't judge a book by its cover, most of the time that's referring to folks. But then what the question is if anybody wanted to share when they have misjudged a book, when you've misjudged a person just by your first impression. Yeah, Dan?
I think sometimes we are judged when we are Christians in a Christian name,
I think that's a very valid point. I think especially, I'm going to refrain from saying especially, but I think since the beginning and since 2,000 years ago and all the way to today, I think the world has a connotation to, if I say I'm a Christian, something automatically goes into their mind what they think. I think that's very true. Works the other way around too, though, don't it? I mean, if we're really being honest, if somebody comes out and says, "Oh, I'm not a Christian," we automatically we have a thought perceived in our minds as well. So I think it does work both ways.
A lot of judgment goes on.
Oh, absolutely. I think April's spot on. A lot of judgment. Well, guys, I had this great point I was going to share. And have you ever had something you really want to say and it just left you?
All the time. You get welcome to the crowd.
I mean, literally,
It gets worse.
It was about the river bridge, and because, you know, this is, the way I go over my Sunday school, you know, I focus on my verses and our verses and what I want to share, and then I go into the questions after I've focused on the verses. And so I read this question, and all the way I had something came right to my mind. I was like, I can't wait to share this with y'all. And then when I got to the river bridge on 16, I thought, okay, what was that point? And it ain't come to me yet.
Jason, what did you get said?
Just,
You need to go ahead and start writing them
I
down.
know I do. And see, I've never done that. I don't, y'all know me, I don't write any notes down for my list. I don't do anything, but it literally, I had this, I mean, it hit me last night. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to share it. And,
You'll learn to write it down.
and I don't have any idea what it is. And so from the river bridge all the way here, Benjamin was driving me. He said, Daddy, why are you so quiet? I said, I'm trying to think. Be quiet, son. It's yet to come to me. So
That's the worst thing you can do, try to think.
yeah, I know.
But it'll come to you at the most inopportune time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So if I think of it, I'll share it with y'all next week. But so anyway,
Better write it down.
that's exactly right. So I don't have a clue what it was. But it was this really neat point that I wanted to share, and it's gone. So
Well, Jason, I lost this little pony come off the necklace, and I never did find. I looked all over the apartment, and I never did find that.
I understand, Linda May.
It disappeared for somewhere. I don't know where it went.
That's how my thoughts do. I know exactly how you feel. So anyway, if
When
it
I'm
comes
going
to,
to generations, I ain't gonna hunt it. I'm gonna just forget it.
I understand. Well, if it comes to me while we're going through a lesson, I'll share it. If it doesn't, then maybe I'll remember it next week. But anyway, the point of it and the way this question ties into our lesson is that as we're going to get into our verses, we're going to see a story about a man that's not an Israelite. We're going to be focusing on a story of a country that's not Israel, of a country that's actually opposing Israel. And so that's the reason I think that they asked this question about judging a book by its cover. So anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about this morning as we get into our verses. Let's go ahead and just jump into 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. And this is our first group of verses. And 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1 says, Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. And she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. So, what's going on? What are these first two verses, what are they talking about? What's going on right here?
Someone of importance had been struck with leprosy.
April said someone of importance had been struck with leprosy. That's exactly right. What was leprosy? Does anybody?
Horrible
Skin disease.
A horrible skin disease. You can go in our material here, at least in my material, but you can read about it. We hear about it all through the Bible. But it was a terrible disease. What oftentimes happened to people that had leprosy? What did the rest of the community do with them?
They isolated them.
They isolated them. They banished them from the community because they were afraid that it would spread to others. We look at that now and can read that and think, oh, that was terrible. How many of us got quarantined during COVID and was told you couldn't come to work?
Church.
We were, wasn't we? I mean, we think about, you read, I don't know, I'm getting off on a lot of tangents this morning, so y'all just bear with me. But there's things that I thought that were pertinent that we already shared. But we hear about leprosy in those days and then how they had leprosy communities and they put these people out there. But in essence, what were they trying to do? They were trying to protect
Themselves. Yeah.
everybody else. They were trying to protect the community. When they told us we had to quarantine, what were they trying to do?
Protect the masses.
Protect the masses is essentially exactly what it was told. I was blessed to be at a workplace that they gave 80 hours of COVID time. So, it didn't really affect me. Heck, I was kind of glad I got it. It was right after during harvest, and, heck, I got 40, I used 40 hours to work in the trees. I didn't feel real good, but I was very blessed to have it. But there was a lot of people that didn't have that. There was a lot of people that had to quarantine, and they just lost a paycheck for.
Well, there was a lot of jobs you couldn't quarantine, and you had to go to work anyway.
Absolutely, and that was the other case. But so, as we talk about this idea of leprosy, realize it was a very difficult disease. It was very hard. There was lots of things associated with it. Throughout the Bible, the word leprosy and the term leprosy has stood to mean a lot of different things. I mean, it's the idea of being cleansed of leprosy is the idea that you're clean. Because what they told you, if you was someone at that time that had leprosy and you was out in the community, you had to actually chant something as you walked through the town. And what was that?
Unclean.
Unclean, unclean, unclean. And so when you think about throughout the Bible, throughout Jesus' ministry, this idea of being unclean, and then the opposite of being unclean is what? Clean. And so the term leprosy has a lot of, it's mentioned and it's used a lot throughout God's Word and throughout the Bible. But so, as April said, here with this gentleman Naaman, he's the captain of the host of the king of Syria. And he had leprosy. Now, does anything about verse 1, about that first little statement, strike you as odd?
Well, usually a king wouldn't have been around anybody that had.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think that's
Usually they're in inner circle and they're not mingling.
That's very interesting.
That's what I was thinking about. He was captain of the guard, whatever, captain of the host,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd be associated with the soldiers or something.
Absolutely.
A man like that get to be where he's at.
Lonnie said, how does a man that has that disease get to be at the position he has? I think that's interesting.
I figured he got it later.
Yeah, and I would have thought, I think so, but they let him keep it. Anybody else?
We don't know at what point he got struck with leprosy though.
Absolutely. We don't have a clue what time during his life had he just gotten it, or.
And plus his being king, he may have descended into that. It may have been out of a royal family to begin with.
It could have. Y'all are very compassionate in y'all's thinking. When I first read this verse, what struck me as odd is, why do we care about what happened in Syria? Did that not strike anybody else? I mean, this is God's story. This is about His people, and here's this nation that's not God's people, and that's what struck me. Y'all are a lot better people than I am. I'll just go ahead and just say that, because I mean, that was the first thing that came to my mind is, I don't care what happened in Syria. Well, who cares if the captain of the army of Syria has leprosy or not? That was kind of the thing that crossed my mind that's interesting about this story. Y'all are, like I said, way more compassionate, because it goes even further to that thought. We'll keep on reading. Well, actually, we're going to come back to it. But let's jump to verse 2, and it says, and the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. So what does verse 2 tell us?
They could have got their leprosy from the prisoners they brought back.
They could have. But then tying to my takeaway of this is what? What had the Syrians done?
Took Israelites.
They had raided
Yeah,
Israel and taken captives.
enemy.
See, y'all are better people.
Yeah,
Enemies
but
of
verse
Israel.
3 is where it all comes together.
Yes, exactly right.
But they're enemies of Israel.
They're enemies of Israel. They're not allies. They're not, you know, someone that Israel and Syria, they're not buddies.
Jason, but sometimes God will take our enemies to teach us a lesson.
Absolutely. And so that was the things that struck me out of verse 1 is that the king, this man Naaman, he was captain of the host of the king of Syria. He was a great man with his master. He was honorable. And then there's an interesting ending of verse 1. It says, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. I find that pretty interesting too. Because of Naaman, the Lord had given deliverance to Syria. Does that not strike y'all kind of odd? It does me.
He could have been a godly man and nobody knew anything about it because we all misjudge others.
Going back to judging a book by its cover, I think you're exactly right, Carolina. The other thing that's interesting to me personally, and I think this is a key takeaway point. Israel was God's chosen nation. They were his chosen people. The Israelites were God's chosen people. But the interesting takeaway from this is that God was also working in the lives of every other nation and every other people, even way back then. You know, when Jesus came and Jesus declared that we're to go throughout the world and make disciples, you know, that was really new to the Israelite people. But that's what Jesus called us as Christians to do. But you see what this little verse tells me is that even way before Christ came, God cared about who?
Everybody.
Everybody, all creation. Even those that went into Israel and done what? Took captives. God still cared about those people. To me, that's a striking part of these two verses. And then it goes on to say about Naaman, it says that he was also a mighty man of valor. But then it says, but he was a leper. Then verse 2 says, and the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And then verse 3 says, and she said unto her mistress, would God, my Lord, were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover from his leprosy. So this little girl that was taken out of Israel as a captive, what did she tell her mistress?
She introduced her to God.
And she said, what about God?
Going to cure him.
He could cure, this prophet through God could cure, I misspoke. That God, through this prophet, could cure her husband of this disease. So let's think about that in lots of different perspectives. And we're going to stay with this verse just a second. Joseph made this proclamation to his brothers when they were reunited. It's a proclamation that I hope sticks with all of us in some way. But Joseph, when he was reunited with his brothers in Egypt, and his brothers fell at his feet and they bowed down and they asked Joseph to forgive them and they cried and begged, Joseph said something to them. He said, for what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Y'all remember that verse?
Mm-hmm.
You remember that story and how that plays out. The reason I say that I hope those verses stick with us, that one little statement, that one little verse, because throughout our lives as human beings, people always do us perfectly, don't they? Right? No. We're human. We live around other humans. And you know, the one bonding factor of all humans is that we're all imperfect. Whether wherever you're from, whatever nationality, what color you are, it don't matter. We have one thing that's essentially completely in common, and that is our imperfection. Therefore, everybody in here has been done wrong in some way by somebody else. Is that a true statement? Don't raise your hand, but yes. I love that verse. I love that Joseph tells his brothers, for what you meant for evil, God meant for good. This little lady, this little maid, had been taken captive by an opposing nation, which everybody in here, I believe, has been blessed enough that none of us have ever been taken captive in any way. But yet, we can sympathize with her. She had been taken from her home, from her people, to another country to be essentially a servant or a slave in this household. But yet what people had meant for evil, God could use for good. And so in that, she tells her mistress, she tells Naaman's wife about who? About God. And about not only about God, but what God could do. And so we see this beautiful picture playing out in verses 2 and 3.
Jason, with her being placed in that household, in that first sentence, maybe that one word is why God placed her there, is when they said he is an honorable man.
Mm.
So he had to have touched God in some certain way by his character.
I think so. I think we can look into all kinds of qualities. I think you're right. And when I first read that, that's what comes to my mind, is that he was an honorable man. He was a good man. Obviously, I think you could take that further to say that the reason he was in the position that he was, the reason that he was the captain of the king's armies, was the fact that he was a good and honorable man. And I think that you can take that from that. You can't say that about everybody, could you?
No.
But you most certainly, it was said about this man named. Anybody else got anything on verses 1 through 3?
I was impressed that it was a little maid and she had such faith.
Oh, absolutely.
So she had been raised in faith.
Absolutely. Before we leave those verses, let's look at this question. Question number 2 in our material says, when have you seen God work through an unlikely person? Anybody want to share an example?
Me.
April said her. Boy, that's a deep fall, April. But April said herself. I think that's a great point. I think we all can fall under that category when that God worked through an unlikely person. Anybody else want to share anything, a story? Think about it. I know I just threw it on you, and if you got an idea, tell me as soon as you do, so you don't forget it like I did.
Better write it down.
Don't ponder on it until the end.
I'd say Lonnie too, because knowing him before and seeing him now, how God has used him.
What a beautiful point. Great point. All right, y'all, anybody else have any ideas, please share them. Let's go ahead and we're going to jump to 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. So we're skipping verses 4 through 9. So I want to just tell you what happens, okay? So what happens is that Naaman goes to the king. And he says, King, can I travel? Do I have permission to go to Israel and go to Samaria and try to find this prophet that this little maid has been talking about? Because this prophet can heal me. So Naaman, the head over the king's army, goes to the king and asks permission to go to Samaria and Israel to be healed. The king says, absolutely. That's a great idea. I support it 100%. And so, here, take all this silver and this gold and all these gifts, and I want you to go and take it to the Israel king, and then ask him for permission to go and to find Elisha. So that's what happened. This man is thought pretty highly of, isn't he? The king says, take all this and go and offer it to the king of Israel and tell him that you're hunting Elisha, you're hunting this prophet, and can this prophet heal you? So that's what Naaman does. He takes this gold and silver and he goes to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel breaks down and tears all his clothes off and mourns because he's sure that Syria is getting ready to raid Israel, and that's why this is happening.
Well, he's already passing judgment on the
Absolutely. And so Naaman, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm coming strictly with good intentions, and the king of Israel's there tearing his clothes and weeping, and so Naaman just leaves. He's just like, whoa, I'm just getting out of this situation. This has been taken way the wrong way. And so he just leaves and goes and finds Elisha on his own. And so that's where we find ourselves in verse 10. So he gets to the place that Elisha is residing, and that's where verse 10 picks up. And it says, and Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, behold, I thought he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. So what's happening here?
he was passing judgment.
Absolutely, God, I think so. What? He was passing judgment. What else was going on?
Let his pride get in the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He let his pride get in the way, for sure. You know, the question in our material says, when have you seen pride get in the way of obedience? Well, I could write a book if you want to take my diary. But it goes to exactly what Susan said. He let his pride get in the way. How does that play out in this story? How do we see that playing out?
He doesn't get in the river to be healed.
And instead he does what?
Goes back home.
Gets mad.
Yeah.
He's mad. So why is he mad? What's he mad about?
He's mad because he wouldn't come out and face him.
He's mad because Elisha wouldn't come out and face him. Here's Naaman. He's traveled from Syria. He's the king's number 2. He's over all the Syrian army. He goes and he hunts down this prophet. He finds where the prophet's at. He asks for tells him what he wants, and the prophet won't come out to meet him. And he's mad. What else is he mad about?
He doesn't like the river this big.
He don't like the river. He's like, in Syria, there's 2 way better rivers than the Jordan. He says, wow, I can't, this don't make any sense. That'd be like somebody telling us it's better to get baptized in the Yadkin than the New River. Boy, we'd fight that, wouldn't we?
Yeah, who wants
who wants to get in the Yadkin River? But our beautiful New River, dang right. So that's essentially what's going on here. He's like, the rivers in in Syria are way better. They're beautiful, and it's way better than the Jordan.
Well,
So
he's
mad
traveled
about
all
too.
that distance, and
this is all I get. I've traveled all this, I've done all that, and that's all you got to tell me. It's got to be. I think there's a little bit more to that too.
I deserve better than that.
I deserve better, but there's no way it's going. This is what I think too. Well, not the dirty water. I think it could be. But I think he thought, there ain't no way this is going to work if that's all you're asking me to do. Does anybody get that out of those verses too?
It's too simple.
It's too simple. It's too easy. There's got to be more to it. Here I've got this terrible disease, and you're just asking me to go get in the Jordan River, this dirty river in my mind, and wash off 7 times, and that's going to cure it. He thinks there's got to be more to it. It's got to be more involved. If you read what he says, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper.
Well, I think it was to show that God is at work and not Elijah.
No, absolutely.
It's his work, not through Elijah, not through magic or anything like that.
Absolutely.
I think also the young maid must have told him that's how it works. And so now he's insulted because Elijah thinks I'm dirty, because he thinks Syrians are just dirty, and the problem is we're not clean.
What a great, great point. Hey, I think that's spot on. He probably had heard she probably did allude to some other ways healings had happened. And it didn't fit in his mind how it could possibly work. I want to just make a statement right now. I have been so guilty of that. I have it in my mind the way something's supposed to turn out and supposed to go. And boy, I put a lot of thought and energy and effort into it. And then I get told to do it a different way, and how does that make me feel? We get wroth, right? We could just borrow Naaman's word right there. We get wroth because it's got to be more complicated than that. It's got to be more to it than that. God, I have poured out my heart, and I've poured out my time and my energy and my effort to make this work. And then you're telling me now to back off, or you're telling me now to do it a different way. There's got to be more to it than that. We can sympathize with this man Naaman.
Jason, there's a lot of times that we step into our own way and don't give God the opportunity to fix it.
Absolutely.
Our pride, we're not humble enough, we think we know better.
We're impatient.
Impatient,
Very much so.
Absolutely, guys. We can really sympathize with them. Mike, did you have something that looked like you were getting?
No.
Okay. Oh, that's a great point. All of it. I mean, we can sympathize with where Naaman's at. I love what April said. He's not thinking I'm clean enough. Elisha thinks I'm a dirty Syrian. And the only way I can get clean is to get in the Israel water, not the Syrian water. He had no idea. Didn't mean nothing about where the water was, did he?
With all this, I keep thinking the simplicity of it is much like salvation. That, we try to complicate it, but it's just a simple matter.
What a great point, April. What a great. Did everybody hear what April said? I don't know if you were back. I mean, but it's a parallel to salvation.
Yeah.
That, there's a lot of people right now, there's a lot of people since the beginning, since 2,000 years ago, that have complicated it and not got saved because they thought they had to be more to it than that. I'm sure Pastor Wayne has seen it in April, and I know Lonnie's seen it. I've seen it. Or they think I've got to do X, Y, and Z before salvation can take place. So what a beautiful picture, as April has said, of the simplicity of salvation. It isn't about Elisha, is it? It had nothing to do with Elisha. It had nothing to do with which river it was. It had nothing to do with where he was from. It had nothing to do with any of that. All it had to do with was obedience to what God had asked. That's all. If you want to boil down life, if you want to boil down our Christian lives, that's what it boils down to. All it is about our obedience to God. That's it. And so, but Naaman, he's just like me. You see, Naaman just ain't got it. And so that's what we see at the end of verse 12. And then let's jump ahead. So we're in 2 Kings just following right along, 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 13 through 19. And it says, "And his servants came near and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now, therefore, I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burden of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace." And so, we've got a lot going on here in this account. I think we all get the general gist of what's happening, but I think it's worth just diving into it because there's so many neat little things. Verse 13 says, "And his servants came near and spoke unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and clean?" So after Naaman gets mad and leaves, what happens?
The servant follows him.
His servants say, "Look, master." They stop him. They said, "Wait a minute." And their response is, what? I love this.
They tell him to go down and wash and be clean to do what he was told.
Great, he would have.
Absolutely,
went ahead and done
Chloe.
it.
His servant says, "Master, if Elisha would have told you to just do some great thing, what would you have done?" He said, "You would have done that, but because he's only asked you to go wash and clean, you don't think that's big enough." That was their. What does that tell us? There's 2 things here that I think are very important out of verse 13. What does that tell us about Naaman? Number 1.
He wasn't being obedient.
He wasn't being obedient, exactly right.
He's somebody his servants can talk to.
Absolutely. I don't know, that's what really hit me. Naaman was a man that his servants could come and talk to. Does that tell us something about Naaman? Mark can probably give us some very good examples of leadership he saw where nobody could ever go and talk to the leader. Could you not, Mark?
Yes, sir.
I've witnessed that in my professional career. I had a division engineer that wouldn't let you go into his office with boots on. So, meaning that if you were the working guys out there doing the job, you were not allowed in the door of his office. So the only people allowed were the ones with loafers on. How did that make me feel?
You ever get his feet dirty?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's 100% case. He never had gotten his feet dirty.
I had a colonel in, when I was Sergeant Major of 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines out in Camp Pendleton. This guy, he was passed over 5 times for a command for an infantry battalion. And finally, I guess he had a 2-star over him that kind of felt bad for him, so he gave him that command. And unfortunately, I was the guy that inherited him. I could not talk to that guy about anything on a list of matters. I mean, I was a senior advisor to him, but he just didn't know
Listen. So, these little examples I'm showing you, Naaman was not that man, was he?
No.
Naaman was a man that his servants could go and speak to. I think that shows a lot about his character. I think it shows going from the very beginning about him being honorable and him being his servants, even though he was mad and left, his servants were able to go and confront him and talk to him. I think that's a really neat.
And were these
picture.
servants akin to the little maid?
We don't know that, but very well could have been. I mean, we just don't know, but he was obviously a man that would listen. Okay, and it says then, and I'm running out of time, and I really, it says that after that, the other thing that's interesting about this is that the servant said, they brought it to his attention, had it been something, just like Chloe said, had he asked me to do something big, or asked you to do something big and flamboyant, you would have done it. Because it's something simple, you're not. They essentially not only stopped him, but what did they do to him? They called him out. They called him out on his obedience. This is critical. Again, it speaks volumes of the man that Naaman was, but it also speaks volumes of the faith and obedience of his servants on who this man was. And so I think those are very, very interesting points. And then we see in verse 14, it says, Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And then it says, And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. After he's healed, he's cleansed, he goes back to Elijah. He says, now I know for sure there is no other, there's only one God. It's the God of Israel. And he makes this proclamation, and then what does he do? He says, I want to give you something. So he's got all this stuff. He took all this stuff, if you remember the little paraphrase I added in there, he took all this stuff that the king sent to give to the king of Israel. Well, I don't know that we don't see in the Bible, but I take it the king of Israel was so tore up he didn't take none of it because he thought it was an act of war. So now Naaman has all this gold and silver and things, and he's been cleansed, and he offers it all to Elisha. And Elisha replies, but he said, As the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So Elijah refused all that Naaman had to offer. And then in verse 17, it says, And Naaman said, now this is where it gets a little complicated, and I'll try to explain it. But verse 17 says, And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules burden of earth? I'm just going to tell you what he's meaning. What Naaman is asking for is all the dirt from Israel that 2 mules can carry. Mm-hmm. Do you see that? That's what Naaman is asking for. He says, okay, you won't take nothing I'm offering. All these gold and silver, you won't take it. But would you let me have one thing? Would you give me all the dirt that 2 mules could carry? And then he goes on to say, For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. And instead of reading that, I want to paraphrase verses 18 through 19. So y'all follow with me. What Naaman is saying, he's saying that the king of Syria, the man that he serves, worships this false god Rimmon. And that Naaman is required to go with the king to worship. So he wants this dirt to make a mound, to make an altar to the one true God, to Yahweh. So that then he can worship God there, and then he can ask for forgiveness for having to go into the presence and be there as his king worships this false god. That's what he's asking for. Do you follow me? Does everybody follow me? Boy, a pretty noble ask. Pretty neat ask. I want to share something with y'all that's real special to me. This little tobacco tin has got dirt in it from Belgium. More importantly, from a place called Bastogne, Belgium. My grandfather, sometime after December the 16th, 1944, rode a truck, got out of a truck in a little place called Bastogne. As soon as he got out of the truck, mortars and shells was going off everywhere around him. He dove on the ground and never expected to see another day. I mean, he thought I'll never come out of this. And the next morning when he was still there, he scooped this full of dirt from the soil there in Bastogne, and he brought it home with him. And he said this was to remember that, God delivered him, and that he wanted to always remember that. And so when he died, I got the little tin of dirt from Bastogne. Do you see that this is what Naaman is asking? Because he was dirty. He had this disease. He was disobedient at the beginning, but then through his obedience, he was cleansed. And he wanted something to take with him to remember that by. In a place that he could go and remember what God had done for him. And that he could go and worship. And even though his boss said, you've got to go with me to worship this Ramon, that he could again go back to his mound of dirt that these two mules carried and get on his knees and say, God, I know that you are the only one true. This is a beautiful ask, what he's asking from Elijah. And what Elijah says is, in verse 19, and he said unto him, go in peace. I agree. God agrees. This is a great ask. And that's what Naaman does. Guys, as we read this story, as we go through these verses, we've hit all these great points. But what the takeaway of it is, the ultimate takeaway is that God restores us as we are obedient. And that obedience sometimes don't look the way we think it should look. Sometimes it isn't the big. Sometimes it isn't the big ass. Have we ever thought about that? Sometimes we think, oh, I'm just skipping over this little stuff because I'm going to wait on the big stuff to be obedient to. We're not called to be just obedient in the big stuff. We're called to be obedient. And I think this is a beautiful picture of it. I think it's a great little story. But has anybody got anything to add before we close this morning?
Jason, that little stuff may end up being your big stuff.
Oh, absolutely. What do you
I
think?
think it's a beautiful picture of salvation in Christ.
I think exactly right, David. I think it's a beautiful picture of salvation.
Jason, as you were going through this, Jason, it kept running through my mind, what if the servants hadn't been obedient and explained to him, hey, you need to go do this or that? The outcome would have been totally different.
Absolutely, Daniel. What a great point. I love that.
And if, for me, if I'm not being obedient and reaching out, the outcome is going to be totally different.
And what an important role that each of us has to hold each other accountable.
Because we're all servants to God once we're saved.
I love that.
We gotta watch our first reactions, because it might be something that is not obedient without thinking about what we need to be doing and waiting on God to lead us the right way.
Absolutely. Guys, they're living it out this week. There's several things I'm not going to hit it all. I did want to hit a couple. It says review. It says write down ways you demonstrate obedience to God during your weekly routine. Beside each one, list the benefit you receive from your obedience. And then the other one it says is request. Spend time in prayer asking God to show you areas in your life where obedience is a struggle. Pay close attention to those areas where pride can become a barrier, and choose one area and make it a matter of ongoing prayer. So that was kind of the living it out this week. And I appreciate you. I look forward to next week. Next week we're going to still be with Elisha, and we're going to look at God's hand in facing opposition. So that's our lesson next week. I appreciate y'all and have a great week.
see.